Shukriya Sonal. Good morning. Zindabad. I want to begin by congratulating the team Protsahan. आपने 10 साल कंप्लीट कर लिया और ये 10 साल काफ़ी चैलेंजिंग रहे हैं ग्लोबली, नेशनली. कोविड भी निकला, पॉलिटिकल चेंजेस हो रही हैं, तो ऐसे माहौल में 10 साल कंप्लीट करना सक्सेसफुली हिम्मत का काम है. So it's congratulations. Also congratulations on this study. So I'm a data कीड़ा. मुझे मज़ा आता है डेटा देखने में, लेकिन आज के माहौल में डेटा के बारे में भी लोगों को प्रॉब्लम है. They don't want data. So keep generating the data. I think when we are most depressed, as many of us are, ऐसे लगता है कि कुछ हो ही नहीं रहा है, तो हमें वापस जाना चाहिए और वो एविडेंस क्रिएट करना चाहिए जो आगे चल के हिस्ट्री क्रिएट करेगा. तो वो तो कोई रोक नहीं सकता ना हमको. हम धीरे 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 टर्माइट्स की तरह, क्या कहते हैं उसको, दीमक की तरह हमको धीरे धीरे चलेंगे तो लोगों को तब हम पता भी नहीं लगेगा कब हमने पूरा एक पहाड़ जैसा बना लिया. So I think the data, thank you. I think this is one foundation for it. We'll keep, and you'll keep doing it. So congratulations again. ये भी अच्छा लग रहा है. अभी विपिन हमारे साथ बैठे हैं, and Vipin and I did our first case of child sexual abuse. कब विपिन? 2002, 2000 कोई नहीं था, वकील भी नहीं मिल रहे थे. We got hold of a lawyer who did some property law type thing and said तुम खड़े हो जाओ कोर्ट में. And Vipin was studying law, so उसको भी खड़ा कर दिया. तो उसका डिग्री बार कंप्लीट नहीं हुआ था, so he could argue but he couldn't represent. So that's how we did our first case, and the judges were also, there was no POCSO court, and the judge looked at us because 2 साल के बाद बच्ची को हम लेके कोर्ट में पहुँचे थे. इसको देख के लगता भी नहीं है इसके साथ सेक्सुअल अब्यूज़ हुआ है. We were like, अच्छा, मतलब कैसा दिखना चाहिए विक्टिम को. So you know that from there to coming now, I think there is a journey. So many more people are doing work on child sexual abuse. ली जैसे lawyers हैं और भी बहुत सारे वकील हैं जो ये करते हैं, support persons हैं. So that in itself is a very big journey, and I think we need to be happy about that. 40 साल हो गए मुझे. So 40 years is a good time to evaluate one's failures or little bit of successes maybe. I met your colleague and I realized she didn't know who HAQ Center for Child Rights was and had never heard of me either. So obviously बहुत सारा dent हमने नहीं किया ज़िंदगी में. So thank you for having me, and as your keynote speaker, it's an honor. As we take many steps forwards, we take a few steps backwards, always. And if the number of steps we take forward are a little bit more than, थोड़े से ज़्यादा हैं वो कदम जो आगे बढ़ रहे हैं. 4 हुए तो उसमें से अगर 3 पीछे हो गए तो 1 अभी भी आगे है. So I think that's the way to proceed on social change, because वही एक hope रहता है हमारे पास. So मैं हमेशा ये कहती हूँ कि हमें सपना देखना आना चाहिए, अभी भी और हमेशा. So I am a dreamer. सपना देखती हूँ, इसलिए ज़्यादा कमरे के अंदर ज़्यादा रहती हूँ, बाहर कम रहती हूँ, या फील्ड में रहती हूँ, वो भी आजकल नहीं करती हूँ. सीनियर सिटीज़न हो गई हूँ ना. तो but if we keep dreaming, like Jaswinder and Sonal and Nicole. Nicole is mid-level. There is Madhavi जो मेरे साथ की है. तो हमारा काफिला बढ़ता जाएगा. So सपना देखना थोड़ा आना चाहिए. And I'm glad that there are younger people who are joining and believing in dreaming. But हिम्मत का काम है और बहुत perseverance चाहिए, क्योंकि हताश होना बहुत आसान है. And sometimes you feel कि वो नाखून से पकड़ के टंगे हुए हैं और गिर रहे हैं, क्योंकि कुछ बदल नहीं रहा है, और जितना बदल रहा है फिर वापस वही आ रहा है. So चाइल्ड सेक्सुअल अब्यूज़ पहले भी थे, अब भी थे, आंकड़े बढ़ रहे हैं। लेकिन हम जब आंकड़ों की बात करते हैं ना, मुझे बहुत डर लगता है कि हम बोलते हैं आंकड़े बढ़ रहे हैं, आंकड़े बढ़ रहे हैं। हम ये क्यों नहीं, ये भी सोचना चाहिए कि शायद लोग ज़्यादा रिपोर्ट कर रहे हैं, वो हमारा हक सक्सेस है। वो दे आर ब्रेकिंग द साइलेंस, दे आर फाइंडिंग द करेज टू कम एंड स्पीक। सो व्हेन वी से आंकड़े बढ़ रहे हैं, डोंट ऑलवेज फ्लैग इट एज अ रेड फ्लैग, because police will stop registering complaints and FIRs. We should be little bit careful. So how we present figures, how we present our data, how we present our work will determine how the change is going to take place. If we flag it only as a red flag in a situation where data is always a red flag in any case, next thing you know, the police station says, because the data on child sexual abuse or sexual abuse of children, as Rahi will tell you, you should not say child sexual abuse, you should say sexual abuse of children. वो थाना से जाता है NCRB के पास. So अगर थाना ने रिकॉर्ड करना बंद कर दिया क्योंकि हमने आंकड़ों को रेड फ्लैग कर दिया, then we will not have the data that you have today to analyze. मुझे 15-20 मिनट का टाइम दिया है और मेरे रैंडम थॉट्स हैं बहुत. मैं स्ट्रीम ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस से बात करती हूँ. फिर बोला है इंग्लिश में बोलो, हिंदी में बोलो, धीरे बोलो ताकि वो ट्रांसलेट किया जाए इन साइन लैंग्वेज. सो आई डोंट नो हाउ आई एम गोइंग टू मैनेज. वही रैंडम सी स्ट्रीम ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस से ही चलेगा. सो मैं जैसे मैंने कहा, मैं 4 decades I've been struggling to work with people who are less privileged than me. 5th of March 1985 is when I started. I still remember the date. And for me, the less privileged is not always people who live in slums and jhuggies and bastis and some gaon far away. Because for me, anybody who is less privileged than me can be somewhere in a situation which could be someone amongst us. So sometimes how we define privilege needs to change depending upon what are the challenges that human beings confront in different situations, and what are the challenges that society is throwing at them. I spent many years before I co-founded HAQ Center for Child Rights in 1998 working on a very wide range of issues. विस्थापन के मुद्दे पर, जल जंगल ज़मीन के मुद्दों पर, महिलाओं के मुद्दों पर. मैंने 10 साल एक महिला लीगल एड केंद्र चलाया था जब मैं मल्टीपल एक्शन रिसर्च ग्रुप की डेप्यूटी डायरेक्टर थी. बाल मजदूरी पर फिर मैंने काम शुरू किया इन चाइल्ड केयर इंस्टीट्यूशंस. पीपल हु हैव रेड माय बुक विल नो that 1992 was the first time I saw an Ashray Griha in Delhi, in Alipur. Then I worked on early childhood care and development when I was a director of mobile creches. I worked on reproductive health. Why am I telling you? I worked on impact of emergencies. क्या होता है लोगों की ज़िंदगी में. सुनामी का देखा, सुपर साइक्लोन का देखा. ये मैं क्यों बता रही हूँ ये सब? Because मुझे लगता है कि जो हक का काम था 1998 में, जो जिस वजह से हक बनाया गया था और हमने बच्चों के मुद्दे को जिस तरीके से देखना था, it was informed by all of this. It was informed by the vulnerabilities that arise from where the child is located and the situation that the child and the child's family, उनके परिवार के साथ क्या हो रहा है, वो किस चीज़ से जूझ रहे हैं, उससे हमारा काम और हमारी पर्सपेक्टिव बिल्डिंग हुई. जो लोग विस्थापित हो जाते हैं वो कहाँ जाते हैं? जब बांध बनता है, जब शहरीकरण होता है, जब फैक्ट्रीज बनते हैं, जब माइनिंग होता है, तो ये और उनकी ज़मीन चली जाती है, तो ये लोग कहाँ जाते हैं? Where do they go? They come to Hatsal. That's where they come. They come to उत्तम नगर. बट हमारे लिए वो एक केस है उत्तम नगर का, हत्सल का, सीमापुरी का. वो सीमापुरी वहाँ से जहाँ भी वो थे और जब वो सीमापुरी तक पहुँचे, what happened to them? As child rights organizations, we never do often go into that. But for me, I think that was the learning that has created the way I look at children today. And even today, as I am the director of the Land Rights, Housing and Land Rights Network, which is my new avatar, this is what informs me. I notice again, homelessness kyun ho raha hai? And suddenly all those things that I worked on when you said like you were 23, I was also 23. When I was 23, and now it's suddenly all making sense and a big pictures comes before our eyes. So frankly, in a world of specialists, child protection specialists, I would say I'm a generalist. मैं आपके neighborhood की general physician हूँ that all families once used to have. And I'm happy that Protsahan has started the Hriday dialogues, which I hope it will emerge like its name, conversations from the heart. Because I believe we need to see with our hearts. दिल से देखने की कोशिश करें और दिमाग से बोलने की कोशिश करें. Speak with our mind so that solutions for change will come. Otherwise, how many of you like Simon and Garfunkel? Yeah, so like Simon and Garfunkel said to us, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening. That's what we're going to turn out to be. I'm informed that each year here, Hriday dialogues will center around children's issues and become a collective platform for sparking change and change makers to address critical issues within child protection and fostering collaborative solutions. I know that today's dialogue is, the topic of today's dialogue is strengthening India's child protection system, and the future editions too will be about child protection. So here, I would like to turn the topic on its head and ask, are we going to be talking about protection of children or child protection? उसको मैं हिंदी में कैसे ट्रांसलेट करूं मुझे समझ नहीं है, क्योंकि दोनों में बच्चों की सुरक्षा आता है. बाल सुरक्षा के बारे में बात करेंगे या बच्चों के लिए, बच्चों के अधिकारों की सुरक्षा के बारे में बात करेंगे? मेरे पास वो सवाल आता है आपके टॉपिक से. Because as I have worked with children who have faced abuse and exploitation, I tried to ensure their access to justice in the case where they are called victims, and as you said, and traveled with them in their journey to become a survivor. For the 2.5 decades I've been doing this, I cannot see myself as the child protection specialist as we see today. आज के तारीख में जिसको हम स्पेशलिस्ट कहते हैं, मुझे नहीं लगता कि मैं वो थी. Which is this child protection sector defined by a set of laws, primarily juvenile justice and POCSO, and because as you said, POSCO nahi, POCSO, it's interesting, POSCO and POCSO interchanging, because POSCO is a mining company that is mining in the Niyamgari hills of Odisha and displacing people. उन विस्थापित करने की बात हो रही है ना उनकी नियमगरी के पहाड़ों में, उड़ीसा में, वो है POSCO. So it is interesting because हम जब इकोसिस्टम की बात करते हैं तो POSCO जो है वो इकोसिस्टम का पार्ट है जिसके वजह से children are getting unprotected. Our understanding on issues must come from the recognition that every action of ours, every act, as we say in human rights language, omission or commission, and these are not, and they may not be directly or specifically related to children as we see it. And so, but every action of omission and commission, and I think human rights language is important because it gives us the language to say what we want to say. Leads to children becoming more and more vulnerable. And so why am I saying that the ecosystem is important? Because my favorite examples are related to agriculture and mining, again, POSCO. When farmers commit suicide, it is children who drop out of schools and get to work. Children in mining areas, जो mining होता है, खदान होता है, जब खदान होता है और खदान हम कभी हम environmental movement जाके उसको बंद कर देते हैं, वो भी ज़रूरी है. इसीलिए हम intersectionality की बात करते हैं, human rights की जब बात करते हैं, तो हम अगर हम silos में सोचते हैं, जैसे आपने कहा सोनल, तो हम कुछ चीज़ें भूल जाते हैं. तो हम as an environmentalist part of me, which I've also is a very much part of me, मैं खदान बंद कर देती हूँ. खदान बंद करने के बाद क्या होता है? The families are out of work. When families are out of work, then what happens to the children? They are the ones who are trafficked and sent to the child you are rescuing in a city. So how are we making all those connections? Taking away access to forests. हमें चाहिए, we need to reserve forests. We need to protect our forests. Then what happens to the forests? We reserve them. We deny access of people who are dependent on those forests, and we suddenly find nutrition levels have fallen around the forest. Are those child protection issues? Or are they, what are they? So what is the ecosystem we are talking about? How are we defining it? So I think what I'm trying to do in my keynote is not talk about, as you, Sonal, suggested, about cases that I have dealt with, but I'm going back to the context in which children live, which invisibilizes them until they become victims who need our support, and why it's so important to reinforce this in our minds again and again before we move forward. Because as long as those remain constant, those situations remain constant, children will continue to veer towards vulnerability, and we will continue to rescue them. And we will continue to argue, आश्रय गृह चाहिए, नहीं चाहिए, support person चाहिए, नहीं चाहिए. But the big picture goes away from our minds. So being in a stage of life that I am, one not only becomes a witness to history, but also a part of it. Before one becomes history oneself. So धीरे-धीरे हम इतिहास बन जाएंगे. So it is in this, so is the case of child protection as I have seen it, the journey of child protection as we know it today. And I thought I'd just set it out for you before tell me when I'm over 20 minutes. As we know it today. Because from history, we learn lessons. इतिहास हमको शिक्षा देती है and helps us to move forward. So थोड़ा सा indulge कर दो मुझे. I feel that I am to blame a little bit about the narrowing down of the narrative today, and I take responsibility for it. Because when we began budget analysis, which is child budget, which has now become so popular, 1998 में कोई child budget की बात नहीं करता था, हम लोग करते थे हक में. So we said we put it out everywhere, we went for a presentation, सरकार के पास भी गए, और हमारा जो फाइंडिंग था, जैसे तुम्हारा पहला फैसला इतना अच्छा फाइंडिंग निकला, हमारा फाइंडिंग था कि चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन सेक्टर पे सबसे कम पैसा निवेश होता है और खर्चा भी होता है. It was like not even 2 paisa in 100 rupees. And we thought we had made a very big finding, and it was a very big finding. Education पे खर्चा हो रहा है, लेकिन ICDS पे खर्चा हो रहा है, अर्ली चाइल्डहुड केयर पे हो रहा है, लेकिन चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन पे नहीं हो रहा है. और जो जितने कार्यक्रम थे, स्कीम्स थे चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन के, दे वर ऑल डिजाइंड फॉर चिल्ड्रन जो असुरक्षित हो गए हैं. they have fallen out of the protective net. That was the list of schemes that existed. So what we did was we put it out. There was a discussion कि इतना कम क्यों पैसा निवेश हो रहा है. सरकार ने भी उठाया, हमारे साथियों ने भी, जो एक्टिविस्ट थे, रिसर्चर्स थे, उन्होंने भी उसकी बात करनी शुरू करी. फिर वो आया टाइम टू राइट द अप्रोच पेपर टू द 11th 5-year plan. वो 2007 की बात है. सो रज़िया इस्माइल और मुझे कहा गया कि आप अप्रोच पेपर लिखिए. तो हमने जो अप्रोच पेपर लिखा, हमने उसी को लिखा कि चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन के सर्विसेज पे सबसे कम निवेश हो रहा है, अनलेस चिल्ड्रन आर प्रोटेक्टेड वेयर, बट दैट पार्ट रिमेंबर, दैट इज आई एम सेइंग इट, वेयर दे आर, हाउ कैन चिल्ड्रन बी प्रोटेक्टेड, वो जहाँ है स्कूल में, कम्युनिटी में, जहाँ पे भी हैं, उनकी सुरक्षा की बात हम कैसे कर सकते हैं. हाउ कैन वी टॉक अबाउट क्रिएटिंग अ प्रोटेक्टिव एनवायरनमेंट फॉर चिल्ड्रन. लकीली उसी टाइम UN में भी बहुत सारे स्टडीज़ हो रहे थे चाइल्ड vulnerabilities of children को लेकर, and UNICEF had also put out a paper on creating a protective environment of children that we helped to draw on, and we wrote up this little paper and we sent it to the for the 5-year plan as an approach paper. And इसी Habitat Center में ground floor में presentations हो रही थी planning commission की. We made the presentation, and then slowly the dialogue, and then Childline stepped in, other organizations stepped in, and that is how came the ICPS, the Integrated Child Protection Scheme. That is how it was drafted at that time. But what were we asking for? We were asking for a preventive program. We were looking for a preventive approach. Now, what did the ICPS become? It became a service delivery scheme under the juvenile justice law. So it's important to understand हम लोग जर्नी कहाँ से शुरू करते हैं और वो कहाँ ख़त्म होता है. हमने कहा था कि हर जगह पे ऐसे लोग होने चाहिए, विलेज लेवल कमिटीज़ होने चाहिए, that will make sure that children are protected where they are. वो स्कूल टीचर हो, कोई इंटरेस्टेड पर्सन हो, पंचायत मेंबर हो, it should organically grow. And we remembered हम लोग, when you're older ना, you see a lot more things. So महिला समाख्या एक बहुत अच्छा कार्यक्रम होता था, वहाँ ऑर्गेनिकली women's groups फॉर्म होती थी. हमें लगा शायद बच्चों के लिए भी ऐसा हो जाएगा. जी नहीं, हम बताएंगे VLCPC क्या होता है. So district level DCPO will go and say तुम और तुम, आज से VLCPC. अगला कार्यक्रम क्या है? VLCPC बोलता है हमारा कार्ड कहाँ है, हमारा निवेश कहाँ है आने जाने का. So what we have created is yet another layer of a hierarchy of child protection services, where that was not the idea. And what we have created is another layer of authority without any accountability. So similarly with the child sexual abuse law that we have today, the law on child sexual abuse. Government of India around the same time in 2005 or 6, put out a paper and said we need to have a comprehensive law on child abuse. Remember, not child sexual abuse, child abuse. जो मेरे उम्र के लोग हैं, माधवी जैसे, उनको पता याद होगा. तो वो एक बड़ा सा पेपर बना था. फिर वो छोटे होते वो कानून बना जो आज बना है, हमारा जो पॉक्सो एक्ट बना है. और 2007 में वो स्टडी करी सरकार ने. हमने कहा कि आप किस बेसिस पे बना रहे हैं कानून में. कहा चलो हम स्टडी करते हैं. तो प्रयास और सरकार ने मिलकर, सेव द चिल्ड्रन के साथ मिलकर, they did this 2007 study, which is a good study. But it also threw up a lot of important things. But in the meantime, why do we have, so that's how we have the POXO Act. And it is good. It's a good law in the sense, the fact that for the first time we have a gender neutral law. Part of the reason that could have been because DCPCR then, if you remember, that was the time when there was a petition filed by NAS Foundation to read down 377. DCPCR and its chairperson, I shall not name, jumped into and went to Supreme Court and said you cannot read down 377 because that is the only law for boys. अगर यौनिक हिंसा होता है लड़कों के खिलाफ तो 377 को छोड़ के और कुछ नहीं है, क्योंकि उसमें अननेचुरल सेक्सुअल ऑफेंसेस डिफाइन होता है. तो शायद इसको देखते हुए बहुत जल्दी में और कानून बनाया गया और एक जेंडर न्यूट्रल लॉ बनाया गया. उसको आईपीसी में क्यों नहीं डाला गया पता नहीं, वो शायद एक कभी और कहानी बताएंगे, क्योंकि तब उस डिमांड ये था कि इसको आईपीसी में डाल दो ना, ये अलग से कानून क्यों बना रहे हो. बट दैट विल टॉक अबाउट इन another it will take another 1 hour. So narratives and approaches always go through cycles. 1980 के दशक में एडुकेशन, चाइल्ड लेबर, उसी के बारे में बात होता था और कुछ नहीं होता था ज़्यादा. डिसेबिलिटी के बारे में, हेल्थ के बारे में थोड़ा बहुत होता था. 1992 में, और सब लोग अलग अलग काम करते थे, अपना काम करते थे, अच्छा काम करते थे, लेकिन साइलोज में काम करते थे. 1992 में UNCRC ratify हुआ. उसके बाद we slowly conversations around principles came in, best interest of the child participation. UNCRC ने पहली बार हमें एक क्लस्टर्ड रूप में दिखा दिया. कहा 4 भाग में बटे हुए हैं बच्चों के हक, right to survival, development, participation and protection. Perhaps that is why we have the child protection specialism or specialization as we have today, because that's how we were told. बच्चों के हक क्या है? 4 हैं, 1 2 3 4. अब किसी बच्चे से भी पूछ लेते, वो बोलते हमको भी पता है. So right to survival, right to development, right to protection and right to participation. So, but over the years, child protection has become synonymous with child rights. So many of the people that you see today saying we are working on child rights are actually working on child protection and mostly working on sexual abuse. Very, very few would be there who are working on CICL. And that, to my mind, or children in conflict with the law. And this, to my mind, is also a reductionist way of looking at children's rights, where every child is seen only as a victim who needs rescue and rehabilitation. One can never be sure how narratives arrive. And I'm saying this because you have a session today with the donors and the media. तो ये narratives कैसे बनती हैं कि आज ये सबसे important है, कल वो बहुत important है. So I do think that the UN and the INGOs play a very important role, though they will say no, but I'm telling you, I think they do. And they definitely define our narratives because हमें तो पैसे चाहिए ना काम करने के लिए. We cannot work without money. So when child trafficking became an important thing, all the organizations that were working on child labor suddenly started working on child trafficking. Now child trafficking is no longer important, they all work on child protection. So how we change the narrative, because we need to survive. CBOs and NGOs need to survive, and to survive you need resources. And how do you get resources? So it's something to think about. So how do we move forward? I have some thoughts. I'm sure you have all got many more. Some may, as I said, be disconnected because they sort of pop in my head. First is, of course, how are we going to address this whole issue? When you put the word ecosystem, what do we mean by it? So will your Hriday dialogue actually be looking at what do you mean by an ecosystem where the child as a whole is being looked at, and the challenges posed by social norms, discrimination based on caste, religion, gender identity. See, even POCSO today, when we are giving data, are giving only girls and boys. And we are saying gender. Disabilities, region, ethnicity. Are we going to address all that in your... Lest we forget, children behave exactly as adults teach us, as we teach them to behave. जो वो देखते हैं, वैसे वो करते हैं. And what we see today, you will see a rise in different kinds of offenses, because what they are seeing is discriminatory behavior. They are seeing violence with होता है, उसका कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. It's impunity, the kind of violence that we're witnessing around them is, they see impunity around it. So what kind of role models are we providing to them today as adults? And what can we do to influence this behavior that we are showing to children so that they do not become what we don't want them to become? Sonal will be very upset with me because she told I'm taking it all over the place. She said, please stick with children in need of care and protection. So, to my mind, children who commit offenses are also children in need of care and protection, because they do behave, as I said, the way we teach them to. And more often than not, the ones who come into the system are the most vulnerable ones. Your and my children don't come into the system. So I think we need to stop a little bit, step back, and stop dividing children into issues and categories and start bringing back the whole child as a whole. And then maybe it'll really be conversations from the heart. My personal experience of working on violence and exploitation tells me that the ones who are the most faceless and the most forgotten are the caregivers. And we remember them, उन caregivers or support persons को हम तभी याद करते हैं जब वो कुछ हादसा हो जाता है, किसी होम से बच्चे भाग गए, कहीं वहाँ से abuse हो गया, तब हमको वो याद आते हैं. Till then we do not remember them, they remain faceless. But how do you support people who work with children? Because the burnout is so high. I ran away to Goa. I couldn't bear to continue to do what I'm doing. It just is not possible to continue year after year without support. What do we do about that? Are we going to discuss that as a part of your Hriday dialogues? Another question that always haunts me is, how do we ensure a sense of justice to children or victims or survivors, whoever? Is the sense of justice only कि कोर्ट में गए, पनिश हुए, जब डेथ पेनल्टी हो गया तो हमें लगता है कि बच्चे को सेंस ऑफ जस्टिस होता है? शायद हाँ, शायद ना, शायद ली बताएंगी होता है कि नहीं होता, मुझे नहीं लगता है, पर मेरे पास सारे जवाब नहीं हैं. पर ये सेंस ऑफ जस्टिस इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, बिकॉज just it doesn't mean access to justice is not important. Access to justice is equally important. And looking at the court system, uski infrastructure mein problem kya hai, judicial attitude mein problem kya hai, all of those are equally important. But even while we work with all of those, and maybe even change them, are we able to bring sense of justice to children, and what do we do about that? Then, of course, there is the law. The number of cases are going up because we draft the laws so badly. All of us jump into draft laws, by the way. We are all law writers today. Because we are activists, somebody tells us, आके कानून लिख दो, मैं भी बैठी हूँ. पर अब hindsight पे लगता है शायद नील नहीं बैठना चाहिए था. We should leave law writing to the people who know how to write the law. Because when we write the law, we put in things that we don't know how to deal with sometimes afterwards, because every language, every word matters. So some very interested people wanted mandatory reporting. जब mandatory reporting नहीं होगा तो breaking the silence नहीं होगा, breaking the silence तो फिर देखिए number बढ़ जाते हैं. But it's also leading to criminalization of consensual sex. How do you deal with that? So then the Chief Justice of India also takes notice of it. So it's important to see how we are going to, what is our role as in the place that we are in, as activists, as experts. Another हवा आया है, deinstitutionalization. पूरा हवा है कि जो लोग संस्था चलाते हैं जिसमें आश्रय गृह है वो सब विलन है. And now they've started feeling like villains themselves. और धीरे धीरे सब institutions बंद हो रही हैं. Because we have, वो हवा कहाँ से आया मुझे पता नहीं. शायद यूनिसेफ का थोड़ा सा रोल है, कोई है यहाँ पे यूनिसेफ से, थोड़ा सा रोल वो है, बट है, हवा आता है, हम उधर भागते हैं. अब सारी संस्थाएं बंद हो जाएंगी. जो जिनके पास कोई नहीं है, कुछ भी नहीं है, उनको आप कहाँ भेजोगे? And all this community care and sponsorship is all very well. But have any one of you read novels in the earlier days? Robert Ludlum, Sidney Sheldon. वो सारे जितने उसमें जो लड़के लड़कियां थीं जिनके वो सब कर रहे थे, the fast paced racy stuff, were all children who had grown up in sponsorship from one home to the other. So is that the kind of sponsorship we are looking at? What do we mean by sponsorship? Do we have the capacity? Is this a country, हम लोग feudal हैं, casteist हैं, हम नौकर बनाने के लिए sponsorship कर सकते हैं, लेकिन अपना बच्चा बहुत कम बनाएंगे. And I'm saying it as it is. So when we go for the हवा, I think we need to थोड़ा हवा के साथ साथ झोंके को फिर थाम लेना बहुत ज़रूरी है. उसके साथ बहने के लिए क्या होना चाहिए या नहीं होना चाहिए. उसी तरह से चाइल्ड लाइन चला गया, हवा का झोंका आया, चाइल्ड लाइन को ले गया. So even in Goa, I am now told that there is no one, children are saying, where should we call? But you see, inclusion होना चाहिए ना, inclusion into government, कर दिया अब हमने inclusion. So जब हम भाषा का इस्तेमाल करते हैं, how does it get translated actually into practice is so important. So there are some very important lessons that we have to learn. One is, of course, laws are important, but it's important to also, penal provisions, as you said, are not the solution. Just setting out numbers is not the problem. Emotional needs ko, demands ko, penal provisions address karta hai. That is why JJ Act changed, death penalty came into rape laws. But what became clear in all the debates that we were engaged in is that even amongst us who say we are child protection specialists, there is no common understanding of what child protection is. And any sanjha soch agar banna hai, so we have to have some understanding of what we mean. I'm also a protection specialist, so-and-so is, but I think all 16-year-olds must go to jail. But I don't think mandatory reporting is okay. We want to change. I think that the child marriage law needs to be raised to 21 years. But I'm a child protection specialist. What happens? So, koi sanjha soch nahi hai, and that is half the problem that we are dealing with today. So, as organizations and individuals, I understand we cannot address everything and every one of those challenges. But at the same time, we cannot be boxed into impact-based boxes either, because social changes don't come in boxes. So how are we going to talk to the donors that you're going to talk to in the evening? That ये product नहीं है boss, कि आपने यहाँ डाला वहाँ 5 निकल के आया. As because 2 steps forward, 5 steps backwards की बात कर रहे हैं. So how do we deal with this? How do we then define, not to say that there should not be accountability, but what should our accountability be if we are working with children and we want to see changes in their lives? I know the cynic in me says that it is not possible, but the optimist in me says, can we work together instead of competing with each other? Because as humans, we essentially are competitive, and the resources are limited, which makes us even more competitive. But in the days of yore, support organizations were support organizations, CBOs were CBOs, fund making were fund making. All of that has become very dhundla now. So everybody is doing advocacy. So we are fighting for spaces on advocacy. सरकार के टेबल पे कौन बैठा है? INGO बैठा है, मैं बैठी हूँ, CBO बैठा है. We are so, everybody is competing for that same space, even not just the resources. We are even fighting for spaces to voice ourselves. So larger organizations, smaller organizations, larger organizations are competing for the same fund resource that smaller organizations are fighting for, and FCRA doesn't make it any easier. But how do we deal with this? Can we have a conversation within this? So welcome media, the role of the media, how it creates narratives, how we enable it to create narratives. Many amongst us were part of the creation of the narrative for the change in juvenile justice law. Many amongst us were part of the narrative that wanted the death penalty for rape of children. So, and media loves those narratives. Media does not like narratives about mining हुआ था, तो बस्ताबमन हुआ था, फिर homelessness हुआ, ये सब उनको नहीं चाहिए. उनको थोड़ा सनसनीखेज चाहिए था, तो वो तो हम देते हैं ना, लेकिन big picture तो हम उनके साथ बात नहीं करते और वो हमारे साथ भी नहीं करते हैं. So with this, I would say, with so many random thoughts that I've put to you, welcome to Hriday Dialogues. Let the conversation begin.